Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. My husband thought his office romance would break me. Instead, it gave me the strength to realize I deserved better. I looked at my reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls, adjusting my blazer and smoothing down my hair. The numbers climbed steadily. 15, 16, 17, each floor bringing me closer to my office, where I'd spent the last 5 years building my career. Today was special. After months of hard work, I was finally getting the recognition I deserved. The promotion to senior marketing director was mine. The doors opened to a chorus of congratulations. My colleagues gathered around, offering warm smiles and hearty handshakes. I couldn't help but think about how different things were from when I first started here. Back then, I was just another fresh graduate with big dreams. Now at 32, I had everything I'd ever wanted. A thriving career, a beautiful home, and what I thought was a perfect marriage. James and I met right here in this office building. He worked in the legal department, and our first interaction was over a spilled coffee in the break room. He'd been so apologetic, insisting on buying me a new one. One coffee turned into lunch, lunch into dinner, and before I knew it, we were walking down the aisle. 3 years of marriage had passed like a beautiful dream. My phone buzzed with a message from him. "Congratulations, love. Can't wait to celebrate tonight." I smiled, remembering how he kissed me goodbye this morning, his cologne lingering on my clothes. James had always been my biggest supporter, encouraging me to reach for the stars while he built his own career as a corporate lawyer. Sarah, my assistant, appeared at my office door with a stack of files. "The new marketing proposals are ready for review," she said, then lowered her voice. "Also, have you met the new legal consultant? She started yesterday." I shook my head, too absorbed in my work to pay attention to office gossip. "Her name's Rebecca Mitchell. She transferred from the New York office. Everyone's talking about how qualified she is." I nodded absently, more focused on the upcoming presentation I needed to prepare. The quarterly meeting was in 2 weeks, and I wanted to prove that my promotion was well-deserved. Hours passed in a blur of spreadsheets and strategy documents, until Sarah reminded me about the office celebration planned for that afternoon. The conference room was decorated with balloons and a congratulations banner. My team had arranged a small party to celebrate my promotion. James was there too, looking handsome in his navy suit. He handed me a glass of champagne, his fingers brushing mine. "To my brilliant wife," he said, raising his glass. Everyone cheered, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. That's when I first saw her, Rebecca Mitchell. She stood near the doorway, tall and elegant in a red dress that seemed a bit too fancy for a regular office day. Our eyes met briefly, and she smiled, walking over to introduce herself. "I've heard so much about you," she said, her voice smooth as honey. "James has been telling everyone about his amazing wife." Something about the way she said James's name made me pause, but I brushed it off. I was being silly, letting old insecurities creep in on what should be a happy day. James placed his hand on my lower back, a gesture that usually brought comfort, but today felt somehow different, almost possessive. The party continued, and I mingled with my colleagues, accepting their good wishes. From the corner of my eye, I noticed James and Rebecca engaged in what seemed like an intense conversation. She laughed at something he said, touching his arm briefly, a small gesture, but it sent an unexpected chill down my spine. Later that evening, as James and I got ready for our private celebration dinner, he mentioned Rebecca casually. "She's brilliant, you know? The firm practically begged her to transfer here. She'll be working closely with my team on the merger project." There was an enthusiasm in his voice that I hadn't heard in a while. I pushed away the unease growing in my stomach. "That's great," I said, applying my lipstick with steady hands. "It'll be good to have someone experienced on such a big project." James nodded, but his eyes were on his phone, thumbs typing rapidly. He'd been doing that more often lately, always on his phone, always urgent work matters. At dinner, James seemed distracted. The candlelight flickered across his face as he checked his phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "Sorry," he muttered. "The merger is at a crucial stage." I remembered when our dinner conversations used to flow effortlessly, filled with laughter and plans for the future. Now silence stretched between us like a growing chasm. That night, I lay awake long after James had fallen asleep. My mind wandered back to the office party, to Rebecca's perfectly manicured hand on James's arm, to the way his eyes had followed her when she walked away. My best friend Lisa's words from last week echoed in my head. Sometimes we're so busy being successful that we miss the warning signs. The next morning, the office felt different somehow. I noticed things I'd been too busy to see before. How James's office door was often closed now, voices murmuring behind it. How Rebecca seemed to always need his opinion on legal matters, her high heels clicking down the hallway to his office several times a day. How he'd started staying late at work more often, citing the upcoming merger as the reason. Sarah brought me my morning coffee and today's schedule. Conference call at 10, team meeting at 2, and the new client presentation needs to be reviewed by end of day, she rattled off. Then she hesitated, playing with her pen. Also, thought you should know there's been some talk in the break room about James and Rebecca. I kept my face neutral, years of corporate training coming in handy. What kind of talk? I asked, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Just they've been spending a lot of time together. Probably nothing, but people are starting to notice. I thanked her and turned to my computer staring at the screen without really seeing it. A notification popped up. A company-wide email about an upcoming office party. The merger project was finally complete, and the legal team was organizing a celebration. I scrolled down to the event details, my coffee growing cold beside me, wondering if this would be where my perfect life would start to unravel. The merger celebration was in full swing. Music played softly in the background as people mingled, champagne glasses clinking. I watched from across the room as Rebecca leaned close to James, whispering something that made him laugh. His hand rested on her lower back, intimate and familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. I took another sip of champagne, maintaining my composed smile. 3 weeks had passed since I first noticed the changes in James, and each day brought new revelations. The late-night meetings that never seemed to end, the sudden business trips that came up with no warning, the way his phone would always be face down on the table. "You're handling this better than I would," Lisa whispered, appearing beside me. My best friend worked in HR, and nothing escaped her notice. If my husband was flirting with someone like that in public, I'd be causing a scene. I touched her arm gently, grateful for her support but determined to stay professional. "I'm not going to give them the satisfaction," I replied, my voice steady. "Besides, I need to be sure." But even as I said the words, I knew in my heart that something was very wrong. The James the first married would never have acted this way, would never have treated me with such casual disregard. That night, James came home late again. The smell of unfamiliar perfume clung to his shirt, mixed with alcohol and lies. "The team wanted to continue celebrating," he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "You understand, right? It's been a tough project." I nodded, watching him disappear into the shower, leaving his phone on the bedroom dresser. I stared at the device, its screen dark and tempting. I'd never checked his phone before. Trust had always been the foundation of our marriage. But as I stood there, remembering the way he'd held Rebecca at the party, my fingers itched to know the truth. The phone buzzed with a new message, the screen lighting up. Even from where I stood, I could read the preview. "Tonight was amazing. I miss you already." My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. There was no passcode. James had always said he had nothing to hide from me. How ironic that seemed now. The messages told a story I didn't want to read. Flirty exchanges during work hours, late-night conversations when he was supposedly working, photos that made my heart stop. They'd been seeing each other for weeks, maybe longer. Every business trip, every late meeting, all lies. I took screenshots and sent them to my own phone, my movements mechanical and precise. Then I replaced his phone exactly where I'd found it, went to the bathroom, and threw up everything I'd eaten that day. However, I was already in bed pretending to sleep. The next morning I called Lisa. "I need your help," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I need to know my options." She didn't ask questions, just told me to meet her for lunch away from the office, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues, at the small cafe across town. Lisa listened as I showed her the evidence. Her face grew darker with each revelation. "That bastard," she muttered. "And to think everyone thought you two were the perfect couple." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "What do you want to do?" I stirred my untouched coffee, watching the cream create patterns in the dark liquid. I want to be smart about this, I said finally.
No drama, no scenes.
I want to handle this my way. Lisa nodded, understanding in her eyes. She'd known me long enough to know I never acted without a plan. Back at the office, I watched James and Rebecca more closely. The subtle touches, the lingering glances, the inside jokes. All the things I'd been too blind to see before. They thought they were being discreet, but now that I knew what to look for, their affair was painfully obvious. Sarah continued bringing me office gossip, though now she was more direct about it. They were in the conference room together for 2 hours yesterday, she reported. The blinds were closed. I thanked her, adding this information to my growing file of evidence. That evening, James announced he had another business trip planned. Just 3 days, he said, packing his suitcase. The client in Chicago needs some hand-holding through the final stages. I nodded, helping him pick out ties, playing the role of devoted wife while my mind raced with plans. Once he left, I went through our home office methodically, financial records, property documents, everything we built together over the years. I photographed important papers and made copies of others. In the back of his desk drawer, I found hotel receipts from cities he'd never told me he'd visited. I called my parents that night, something I'd been putting off. Mom answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. "Honey, is everything okay?" The concern in her voice nearly broke my composure. "No, Mom," I admitted. "But it will be." The next day, I scheduled a meeting with the divorce lawyer. The evidence I'd gathered was spread across her desk as she took detailed notes. "This is very thorough," she commented. "Most clients come to me emotional and unprepared. You've done half my job for me." I smiled without humor. I learned from the best. My husband's a lawyer after all. She nodded approvingly and began outlining my options. As she spoke, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The pain was still there, but it was overshadowed by something stronger, determination. At work, I maintained my professional demeanor. I excelled at my new role, led successful campaigns, and acted as if nothing was wrong. If people noticed that I no longer ate lunch with James or that we arrived at work separately, they didn't mention it. Rebecca grew bolder. Probably encouraged by James's obvious attention, she wore more daring outfits, spoke to me with barely concealed smugness, and made sure to brush against James whenever I was watching. Their performance was meant to hurt me, to make me break down and cause a scene, but they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know about the file of evidence growing larger each day. They didn't know about the lawyer or the plans being set in motion. They thought they were breaking me, but with each passing day, I grew stronger, more resolved. The annual company gala was always a grand affair, but this year felt different. As I stepped into the hotel ballroom in my black evening gown, I could feel eyes following me. Everyone knew about James and Rebecca by now. It was the worst-kept secret in the office. They were probably wondering how I would handle seeing them together at such a public event. I moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. My team gathered around me, creating a protective circle of friendly faces. They'd been incredibly supportive, though no one dared mention the elephant in the room. Sarah hovered nearby, occasionally shooting worried glances in my direction. "You look stunning," Lisa said, appearing at my side in a red dress, like a woman who's about to burn everything to the ground. I laughed softly, taking another sip of champagne. "I prefer to think of it as strategic demolition," I replied. Lisa grinned, understanding the double meaning in my words. The room hushed slightly as James and Rebecca made their entrance. She wore a tight silver dress that caught the light, while he looked handsome in his tuxedo. They weren't exactly together, but they weren't trying to hide either. My husband's hand kept finding a way to her waist, his fingers lingering just a moment too long. "I can't believe he has the nerve," Sarah muttered under her breath. I touched her arm gently. "It's fine," I assured her. "Everything is exactly as it should be." And it was. Every move they made, every public display of affection, only added to the evidence I'd been collecting. The evening progressed with speeches and awards. Our company had had a record-breaking year, and the CEO was in high spirits. I accepted an award for my department's performance, my voice steady as I delivered my thank you speech. From the corner of my eye, I could see James and Rebecca whispering together at their table. During dinner, they grew bolder. Perhaps it was the wine, or maybe they thought I was too defeated to care anymore. Rebecca leaned into James, feeding him bites from her plate. He whispered in her ear, making her giggle like a schoolgirl. The display was calculated to hurt me, to show everyone that he had moved on. I maintained my composure, engaging in pleasant conversation with those around me. The CFO asked about our latest marketing campaign, and I detailed our success with enthusiasm. Nobody would have guessed that under the table. My nails were digging into my palms so hard. The dancing began after dinner. I watched as James led Rebecca to the dance floor, pulling her close as they swayed to the music. They were putting on a show, and the entire room was their audience. People shot sympathetic glances my way, probably expecting me to run out in tears. Instead, I excused myself to the ladies' room, checking my makeup in the mirror. My reflection showed a woman in control, not a hint of the turmoil beneath the surface. The bathroom door opened and Rebecca walked in, her silver dress catching the light. She smirked at me in the mirror. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "This must be so hard for you." I turned to face her, my expression neutral. "Actually, you've made things very easy for me," I replied calmly. Her smirk faltered slightly, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. When I returned to the ballroom, James and Rebecca were still dancing. He spun her around, both of them laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. As the song ended, he pulled her close and right there in front of everyone, kissed her deeply. The room went silent. All eyes turned to me, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. James broke the kiss and looked directly at me, challenge written all over his face. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to make a scene that would paint me as the hysterical wife. Instead, I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that seemed to unsettle him more than any outburst would have. I raised my champagne glass in their direction, took a sip, and turned back to my conversation with the CFO. The silence in the room slowly gave way to a murmur of confusion. Lisa appeared beside me, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I nodded, still smiling. "Better than okay," I replied. "They just made tomorrow so much easier." She squeezed my hand, understanding dawning in her eyes. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing, drinking, and forced gaiety. James and Rebecca continued their performance, growing more obvious as the night wore on. By the time the valet ended, there wasn't a person in the room who hadn't witnessed their behavior. As I waited for the valet to bring my car, I overheard two board members talking. "Disgraceful display," one muttered. "And right in front of his wife." The other shook his head. "Never thought James would be so unprofessional. Wonder what this will do to his chances for partner." I drove home alone, the city lights blurring past my window. James wouldn't be coming home tonight. He hadn't for weeks. But that was fine. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. His public display of affection with Rebecca was the final piece I needed. In my home office, I opened my laptop and began composing emails. One to HR, one to the board of directors, and one to James's law firm. Each email was carefully worded, professional, and factual, detailing the inappropriate relationship between a senior lawyer and his subordinate. I attached photos, screenshots, and witness statements I'd collected over the weeks. Attachment was a video from tonight's gala showing their very public kiss. Then I scheduled the emails to send first thing Monday morning. Opening my safe, I pulled out the manila envelope my lawyer had prepared. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out and ready to be served. I ran my fingers over the documents, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. James thought his kiss would break me. Instead, it had given me exactly what I needed. I changed out of my gown and climbed into bed, sleeping better than I had in weeks. Tomorrow would be interesting, but tonight I could rest easy knowing that the trap they'd set for themselves was about to snap shut. Monday morning arrived with a storm of chaos. I walked into the office early, before most people arrived, and settled at my desk with a cup of coffee. Right on schedule at 8 a.m. sharp, my pre-scheduled emails went out. By 8:05, my phone started buzzing with messages. The first call came from HR. "We need to discuss the evidence you've submitted," the director said, her voice carefully neutral. "Of course," I replied calmly. "I've cleared my morning schedule." As I hung up, I could see people rushing toward the executive floor. The show was about to begin. James arrived at 8:30, looking smugly satisfied from the gala events. He hadn't checked his work email yet. He never did until after his morning coffee. I watched through my office window as he strolled to the break room, Rebecca following close behind. They thought they were still in control of the narrative. At 8:45, James's phone started ringing. From my office, I could see him frowning at the screen, then rushing back to his desk. Rebecca hovered nearby, her face growing increasingly pale as she read over his shoulder. The smug smiles from moments ago vanished, replaced by looks of panic. Lisa appeared in my doorway. "The board is in an emergency meeting," she reported, "and the managing partners from James's law firm just arrived." I nodded, straightening the files on my desk. "Right on time," I murmured. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. The divorce papers sat in my briefcase, waiting for the perfect moment. My lawyer had assured me they were ironclad, especially with the mountain of evidence I'd gathered. The prenup James had insisted on, thinking it would protect his future earnings, would now work against him. Security arrived on our floor at 9:15. They headed straight for James's office, where he was frantically making phone calls. Rebecca stood frozen at her desk, mascara streaking down her face as she realized the implications of what was happening. Their affair hadn't just been exposed, it had been documented and reported to every relevant authority. I met with HR at 10 o'clock. The director looked uncomfortable as she reviewed the evidence. "This is very serious," she said. "The company has strict policies about relationships between supervisors and subordinates." I nodded, maintaining my professional demeanor. "I understand." I felt obligated to report it, given my position in the company. By lunchtime, the entire office knew James and Rebecca had been suspended pending investigation. The law firm's managing partners had spent 2 hours in the conference room, their faces growing grimmer by the minute. Workplace relationships weren't just frowned upon in legal circles, they could destroy careers. My phone buzzed with a message from James. "What have you done?" I didn't reply. He'd find out soon enough. Instead, I focused on the email from my lawyer confirming that everything was proceeding as planned. The divorce papers would be served within the hour. At 1:30, I was called into a meeting with the board. They wanted to assure me that the situation was being handled appropriately. "We value your contributions to this company," the CEO said, "and we appreciate you bringing this to our attention in such a professional manner." I thanked them graciously, playing the role of the dedicated employee who had been wronged but remained professional. James was escorted out of the building at 2 o'clock. He stood in the lobby, a tense face red with anger as security watched him pack up his personal items. That's when the courier arrived with the divorce papers. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. A small crowd had gathered to watch his departure. "You've been served," the courier announced loudly, handing James the thick envelope. He stared at it, then at me as I descended the stairs. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He finally understood that while he'd been playing games, I'd been playing chess. "How could you do this to me?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Your career, your reputation." I smiled the same peaceful smile I'd worn at the gala. "No, James, you did this to yourself. I just made sure everyone saw it." Rebecca appeared behind him, her face streaked with tears. "They're firing me," she whimpered. "My career is ruined." James didn't even turn to look at her, too busy flipping through the divorce papers with trembling hands. His face went pale as he reached the section detailing his infidelity and its professional consequences. "The prenup," he whispered, realization dawning. "You used my own prenup against me." I nodded, remembering how proud he'd been when he presented it to me before our wedding. "Class 27, I quoted. "Infidelity resulting in professional damage nullifies all protective provisions." The lobby had grown silent, everyone watching our exchange. James looked around, suddenly aware of their attention. "This isn't over," he threatened weakly. "I'm a lawyer. I'll fight this." I shook my head, almost pitying him. "No, James, you're a lawyer. After today, you'll be lucky if you can practice law anywhere in this state." I turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and the house keys?" I held out my hand expectantly. "The locks have been changed, but I'm sure you'd like to maintain appearances." His hand shook as he dropped the keys into my palm. The sound they made hitting my hand echoed in the silent lobby. As I walked away, I heard Rebecca's voice rise in hysteria. What about me? What am I supposed to do now? Yes's response was lost in the murmur of spectators, but I didn't need to hear it. Their relationship, built on stolen moments and lies, wouldn't survive this fall from grace. Back in my office, I closed the door and took a deep breath. My phone was flooded with messages from friends, family, and colleagues. Everyone wanted to know if I was okay. I smiled, looking out at the city skyline. I was better than okay, I was free. Lisa knocked and entered without waiting for a response. That was the most beautifully executed takedown I've ever seen, she said, setting 2 cups of coffee on my desk. How long did you plan this? I picked up my cup, enjoying the warmth. Since the first screenshot, I replied. Never start a war unless you know you can win it. 6 months passed like a gentle breeze. The divorce was finalized faster than anyone expected. James didn't have the courage or the resources to fight it. His reputation in the legal community was shattered, and the last I heard, he'd moved back to his hometown to work at a small-town law firm. I sat in my new corner office, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The promotion to executive marketing director had come as a surprise, though Lisa insisted it was well-deserved. They know talent when they see it, she said. And you handled that whole mess like a true professional. Rebecca had disappeared from the corporate world entirely. According to office gossip, she tried to reconcile with James after they were both fired, but he blamed her for his downfall. Their great love story had crumbled under the weight of real consequences. The last I heard, she was working as a waitress in a small diner, telling anyone who would listen about her former life as a legal consultant. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Dinner still on for tonight? I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. My parents had been my rock through everything, never once saying, "I told you so," even though they'd had their doubts about James from the beginning. As I gathered my things to leave, Sarah appeared in my doorway. She'd been promoted to marketing manager, filling my old position. "The new campaign numbers are in," she said, grinning. "We've broken all previous records." I wasn't surprised. My team had become stronger than ever, united by the events they'd witnessed. The restaurant my parents chose was one of my favorites, a cozy Italian place with private booths and excellent wine. Mom hugged me tight when I arrived. "You're glowing," she said, studying my face. "Freedom looks good on you." Dad squeezed my shoulder, his eyes proud. Over pasta and wine, we talked about everything and nothing. Mom mentioned running into James's mother at the grocery store. "Poor woman looked awful," she said. "Apparently, James is drinking too much and blaming everyone but himself for what happened." I twirled pasta around my fork, feeling nothing but distant pity. "He made his choices," I said simply. "Now he has to live with them." My father raised his wine glass. "To choices and consequences." Toasted, we clinked glasses, and I felt warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the wine. After dinner, I took a detour on my way home, driving past the house James and I had once shared. I'd sold it 2 months ago, using the money to buy a sleek downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. The new place had no memories of betrayal, no echoes of broken promises. My phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. It was from James. "I miss you. I made a mistake. Can we talk?" I deleted the message without replying. He'd sent similar texts every few weeks, each one more desperate than the last. I had nothing left to say to him. Back at my apartment, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine. The city lights twinkled below, and I could see my reflection in the window. A woman who had turned betrayal into triumph. The divorce settlement had left me with everything I'd owned before the marriage, plus a significant portion of our joint assets, thanks to that prenup James had insisted on. Lisa called as I was settling onto my balcony. "You'll never guess who I saw today," she said without preamble. "Rebecca." She was serving coffee at that diner near the courthouse. She tried to pretend she didn't recognize me. I could hear the satisfaction in Lisa's voice. "Karma really is a beautiful thing. How's the dating scene?" she asked, changing the subject. I laughed. Several men from the office had asked me out since the divorce, but I wasn't ready. "I'm enjoying being single," I told her. "For the first time in years, I don't have to consider anyone else's feelings or plans. It's liberating." The next morning, I had a meeting with the board. They wanted to discuss expanding our marketing department internationally. As I presented my proposals, I caught a few admiring glances from the male board members, but they were professional and respectful. My reputation for handling the James situation had earned me a new kind of respect. After the meeting, the COO pulled me aside. "We're lucky to have you," he said. "The way you handled that unfortunate situation showed us exactly what you're made of. We need people like you in leadership." I thanked him, remembering how different things had been just 6 months ago. That evening, I attended a charity gala, the same one where James had kissed Rebecca so publicly. This time I walked in alone, confident in a red dress that turned heads. Several colleagues came over to chat, and I found myself enjoying the evening in a way I never had when I was worried about James's wandering attention. A handsome executive from another company asked me to dance. As we moved across the floor, he mentioned hearing about my marketing successes, not a word about the scandal. My professional reputation had completely overshadowed the drama of my personal life. Later that night, as I got ready for bed, I found an old photo of James and me in a drawer. We looked happy, unaware of what the future held. I didn't feel angry anymore, just grateful for his betrayal. Al had forced me to become stronger, to remember who I was without him. I slept peacefully that night, something that had become routine rather than exceptional. In my dreams, there were no memories of betrayal, no echoes of that public kiss. Instead, I dreamed of board meetings and marketing campaigns, of future successes and new beginnings. The next morning, I stopped by my favorite coffee shop before work. The barista knew my order by heart now, no more picking up coffee for two. As I waited for my drink, I caught my reflection in the shop window. I looked younger, somehow lighter. Someone had told me once that living well is the best revenge. Looking at myself now, I finally understood what they meant.